Welcome to Critical Issues, Alternative Views. I'm Ron Kramer from the Department of Sociology at Western Michigan University, and I serve as the host of our program. And joining me this time around are our two regular viewmeisters. On my right is Denise Keel. Denise is a professor in the Political Science Department at Western Michigan University, and she's also associated with the Institute of the Environment and Sustainability.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. And Denise also serves a very important role on campus as the chair of our working group on climate change. Also joining me today, Don Cooney. Don is a professor over in the School of Social Work at Western Michigan University, and he's also a city commissioner in the city of Kalamazoo, former vice mayor. Well, our topic this time around on critical issues, the critical issue that we want to focus on is the fact that Trump has withdrawn from the Iran nuclear agreement, which had been put together by the Obama administration. And we also, I think, in talking about this particular foreign policy issue will involve the state of Israel involved in the Iran deal, but then that will also lead us to talk about some of the events that unfolded in Israel in recent weeks, the moving of the embassy, the U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the massacre that took place in Gaza. So let's start with the Iran deal. What Trump withdrew from was something called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action that had been negotiated by John Kerry as Secretary of State in the Obama administration. And what this plan did is it basically prevented Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, right? That was the purpose. Now, it was a complex set of negotiations, and of course, with diplomatic negotiations, nobody ever gets everything that they want. But from the outside, this deal looked pretty good. Iran agreed to reduce its stockpile of uranium and to stop enrichment processes and to reduce the number of centrifuges, and basically there was in place an agreement that would prevent Iran from becoming a nuclear weapons power. And it was enforced through a very rigorous, intrusive, probably the most intrusive inspection system that's ever been developed in international diplomacy. And so again, whether we didn't have to trust whether Iran was going to comply with the agreement, we could verify it because we had inspectors on the ground. Everyone who was involved in the inspection process said that Iran was complying. They were in full compliance. And this included the International Atomic Energy Agency. They said that they're complying. So it seems like this was a very, very successful negotiation, right? We didn't want Iran to become a nuclear power. We had set up an agreement that prevented them from becoming a nuclear power. And so what's not to like about this, right? Well, of course, Donald Trump did not like it. Why did Donald Trump not like it? Well, first and foremost, because it was done by the Obama administration, right? And so he railed against this on the campaign trail, said it was the worst deal ever, but he had absolutely no evidence to back that up or reasons or rationale why it was a bad deal. Trump kept bringing in all kinds of irrelevant issues like, well, you know, they still have intercontinental ballistic missiles, right? And they're still supporting the other Sunni groups in the Middle East, the Hamas and Hezbollah, and of course those are always referred to as terrorist groups, right? Without question, they are assumed to be terrorist groups. Nobody else is a terrorist, though, except those guys, right? So Trump kept raising those kind of issues. He also objected to the fact that there was sort of some sunset provisions. So in 10 years or so, we would have to revisit this deal and see where we were and whether we needed to keep going. Of course, what Iran got out of this was a reduction in this harsh sanctions, economic sanctions that had been applied to them, which essentially meant allowing them to access their own money, right? Their money had been frozen in American bank accounts, and we were now going to let them actually have their own money back. So Trump kept bringing up all these things, and of course one of the objections that he had was, well, in 10 years, there's a sunset provision. In 10 years, they might begin to acquire a nuclear weapon. So So of course, because in 10 years there might have to be some kind of a reset, then of course you abolish it right now and allow them to start working on acquiring a nuclear weapon immediately, right? So to me, I mean, one writer said that this was an idiocy in action. And to me, it's stupid, it's dangerous, it's illogical, it's irrational, it's dangerous and contradictory. Because the issue is we don't want Iran to acquire a nuclear weapon, and so now we've scuttled an agreement that prevented them from doing so. So it's just completely contradictory and irrational. So Denise, explain this to me.
Wow,
Denise, explain this to me.
Outside of those things, it was good.
It was good, right, exactly. So, you know, I think there are probably two main things to consider. And the first is the point you bring up about the danger. What do we now rationally expect Iran to do?
Right.
I think that's the first kind of line that we should consider, right? And what do we now expect? You know, this was a multilateral agreement, right? The UK, France, Germany, Russia, and China. What do we now expect them to do? Should be our second question. And as far as I can work out, neither of the answers to those questions are very good for the United States. What does Iran do in this situation, right? What do our partners do? They could likely, and seems by all accounts, will continue their agreement with Iran, which strengthens those economic ties and leaves the U.S. out of it. Or, right, what do we expect Iran to do? I think the U.S. is pushing for a regime change, right? I mean, our ask is huge. It's not just all that stuff that was in the regular agreement. It's get out of Syria, get out of Yemen, all these other things because of the supposed terrorist groups that are there. We know that's not going to happen. So what are we really pushing for? We're pushing for regime change and ultimately possibly war with another Middle Eastern country. I mean, what do we really expect Iran to do at our childishness? It's the moderates and the reformers who support this deal. Right? So what are we saying? What are we really saying? We're saying extremists, come on out and then come and get us. Right? I think that's what we're saying because we've got these hawks at the top of this game, and that is extremely dangerous. And it's not like we haven't overthrown some governments before with some pretty terrible results. I mean, that's how we got into this situation with Osama bin Laden in Afghanistan in the first place, many would argue. So that to me is the real danger. Iran could just say, okay, no problem, then we'll go back to doing our nukes, or they strengthen economic partnerships with our partners who are pretty angry at us for pulling out of this, because the U.S. is now even considering secondary sanctions. So let's say, you know, we stick with our ultimate sanctions on Iran because the logic is that will bring them back to the negotiating table. Well, not unilaterally, not when they can still make a deal with China, Russia, UK, who, wants their oil. That's what we're talking about here, right? They're going to make those deals, and we're going to be further isolated and be considered further dangerous in the world scene.
So you used the word logic.
Yeah,
I think this is difficult to talk about logic. I guess one of the things that strikes me is the isolation of this decision. You mentioned all those other countries who were urging us not to pull out and giving a very powerful reason. But then also the head of Central Command and his national security advisor both said, no, it would be a mistake to move away from this. That's right. So this was a decision that he made, and it's another instance where we see the influence of Bolton, I think.
I think so.
And that's really scary, because Bolton really wants to regime change, and whatever that takes, and whatever that costs. And William Hartung, who we had on a show very recently, wrote an article and saying this is the beginning of the war. And that's what's really scary. That's just what we don't need. Another war in the Middle East. Scary.
Right, and but
Very
I think
scary.
that's exactly what's being incited by this, right?
Exactly.
And
Exactly.
we're saying we'll bring it on, and I think Pompeo is just as much of a hawk. And of course, the story is that Rex Tillerson, the former Secretary, was kind of pushed out because he was never going to go for this.
That's right.
And so now we replace those with people who support only your actions, and here we find ourselves making ridiculous statements, not just to Iran, but to our allies.
Exactly, yeah. And once again, it aligns us with Israel, which will fit into what we're going to talk about later. But I think, whose side are we on with this whole? Yeah. We're by ourselves,
that's right.
But with Israel and with the hawks, and that's a very dangerous spot to be right now.
That's right.
And with Saudi Arabia.
And with Saudi Arabia.
That's right.
And with Saudi Arabia.
I mean, I think part of what's going on here is that there's certainly a geopolitical contest going on in the Middle East for who's going to be the dominant controlling power in the region. Yeah. This is primarily a contest between Saudi Arabia and Iran, and of course Israel's sitting right there in the middle.
Right.
Yep.
And it appears as if Israel and the Saudis and the U.S. under the Trump administration have created an alliance or strengthened an alliance.
Right.
And that this is a contest between Saudi Arabia and Iran, with Israel and the United States basically taking the Saudi side, having their own interest in wanting to weaken Iran. Israel would definitely, I think Netanyahu definitely wants to go to war with Iran. I mean, that seems clear from his actions and his manufacturing of evidence that's, you know, 20 years old and completely out of date and irrelevant to the current discussion.
Right.
So,
I remember one of the big reasons supposedly for this is that Iran was already cheating on this, and even though there's no evidence of that, and as you pointed out, Ron, this is one of the most stringent checkpoint. I mean, they can do random checks anytime something looks suspicious without notification in that current deal. That's something that's pretty amazing to be able to do that in Iran. I don't think you could ever get better than that, right? So to then say, well, that they're still cheating us somehow.
Yeah, all the reports
and they really, right, and we know how much plutonium got shipped back to the Ukraine, right, in Georgia, for instance. We know all that stuff, yet somehow we're still guiled into believing again, well, they've got to be cheating.
Well, Denise, so that's because you assume that the President of the United States and our foreign policy establishment should base their actions on facts.
I know.
Right. That's
your big mistake.
It's a crazy thought. I agree. We are not rational. I know.
Well, and again, it's so amazing to hear the President of the United States give a press conference announcing this momentous decision, and almost every single thing he said during that press conference was a lie.
It was not true.
It was absolutely not true, or a gross distortion of the situation.
That's right.
Everything he said in that press conference was a gross distortion.
Yeah.
Now, how can we have a coherent foreign policy if the President of the United States doesn't even understand the basic facts of the situation or lies about them? And again, overwhelming pressure from our allies. France and Germany, they kept coming here and basically saying this would be really stupid to withdraw from and irrational to withdraw from this agreement. Why are you even thinking about this?
Exactly.
And again, other members of the U.S. foreign policy establishment and intelligence community saying, don't do this. This is not the right thing to do.
Right.
And yet, again, here we see the influence of Bolton and Pompeo, who were called the unhinged warmongers.
Yes.
And again, what's the alternative? If we withdraw from this carefully crafted negotiation that prevents Iran from getting a nuclear weapon, and now Iran decides, well, the hell with it, we are going to get a nuclear weapon, then of course they've got the war that they've been itching for. I mean, Bolton has openly spoken of wanting to bomb Iran for a long period of time, as if that's going to solve anything, as if that's going to really reduce their weapons program.
Exactly.
Again, unhinged warmongers is, I think, a very apt term. These are dangerous men. These are
very
dangerous men.
Very dangerous.
Because they're pushing for war, a war that would be disastrous and costly to the United States as well as to the world. And yet that's what we're faced with at this point, because there's no alternative.
Right.
Trump doesn't have a plan B
No.
here.
No.
There's no alternative. I mean, he
No.
could say, well, I'm withdrawing, and here's what we're going to put. No, we're withdrawing. We're going to ratchet up the pressure. And if the Iranians don't cry uncle,
exactly.
then what's left? Then the only thing left is war.
Right.
So the hardliners in Iran now say, we told you, we can't trust these
great,
guys.
see,
Right,
exactly.
right. And how can we negotiate with North Korea when we've already shown ourselves to not stick up to the agreements that we made in the past?
Right.
So, yeah, just...
So, yeah, the other question that I ask myself is, well, who can stop this?
Right, right.
Who can override this? And I do think that the other partners in the agreement are right now, again, at least keeping up their own economic deals and starting to strengthen those, and the EU in particular, keeping them on the SWIFT, the banking system, and giving it even greater investments into Iran. And maybe that is the way to keep it together, which also isolates America, leaves us out of the next economic boom and transition, right? The other people who could stop this would be Congress.
Oh, wow.
We could think about an internal solution, but I'm laughing because it's just so unhopeful to think that this Congress would have anything to say about second-party sanctions, any of the things that they would be able to check the president's power on in this. Right. There's numerous avenues they could take, and I wish someone was actually thinking about bringing them up. But you don't hear a lot about, how can we stop this from our own internal Congress at this point, which there would be lots of different ways. So,
well, even before Trump came around, the American perception of Iran and the American position on Iran was one that was seriously out of whack.
Correct. Yeah.
Right? I mean, nobody seems to remember the history here.
Yeah.
Nobody seems to remember that in 1953, the United States overthrew the democratically elected government of Iran and replaced that democratically elected government with an autocrat, a dictator, a brutal dictator, the Shah. And that the Shah and his secret police ruled in Iran for years and years and years and oppressed the Iranian people. Now, when the Shah was in command, we were fine with that. We were fine with supporting a murderous dictator in Iran.
Because we could control them to some extent, right? We thought.
So what happened? So eventually there is an Islamic revolution, right? Which is, of course, not what we wanted to see happen, but of course it happens. And the hardline Islamicists in Iran are able to take over, right?
That's right.
Then, on top of that, we have the hostage crisis, right? Now, most Americans still remember the hostage crisis in one way or another, right? But they assumed that it was a completely one-sided thing, that somehow out of the blue, Iranians took over our embassy. But it was in the context of this Islamic revolution that we were trying to prevent. We were trying to still support the Shah. In fact, President Carter, if you remember, allowed the Shah to come to the United States for medical treatment and to further irritate the Islamic Revolutionary Guard in Iran. So they took over our embassy and they held a number of people hostage, and it was a crisis situation that drug on for months, and only being resolved because of probably some backwater channel deal that the Reagan administration made with the Iranians at that point. But then again, and we should also point out that in 1980, we encouraged Iraq, Saddam Hussein, who was our friend and ally at the time. We encouraged Saddam Hussein to attack Iran, and he did, and there was a brutal war that went on between the Iraqis and the Iranians. When it was mentioned that Saddam Hussein later charged that Saddam Hussein had used gas, nerve gas against his own people, well, it was in connection with this brutal war and trying to deal with the Kurdish population. So it was a mess, but. So again, Americans don't remember. We overthrew their democratically elected government. We imposed a murderous dictator on them for years and years and years. We opposed the revolution that took place there. We attempted to undo it by encouraging Saddam Hussein in Iraq to attack Iran. So Do you think there's a reason why the Iranians might
Why
chant
don't
death
they
to
trust
America?
us?
Why don't they trust
Exactly.
us? Why don't they like us? Why do some of them chant death to America?
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
So again, that history is completely lost. It
Yeah.
goes completely down the memory hole.
Yeah.
Anyone in the administration or in the Congress will not reference this
Right.
history. And so it's always as if somehow out of the blue, the Iranians are sort of innately evil and innately out to get us. And we can't understand
That's
why
right.
they hate us or why they're out to get us or why they're so evil and why they do such
Yeah.
bad things. So we paint this picture of them then as this sort of devil incarnate, right? And
Yeah.
of course that completely ignores this history.
Yeah.
And it's just sort of an amazing process. So
Yeah, no, I think that's so important, right? I mean, the term that I've learned from you guys on this show is American exceptionalism, right? This is a good guy, bad guy thing, and they have to be the bad guys,
Right.
no matter
Right.
what we've
Yep.
done. And that's why this situation is, I mean, boy, you talk about not learning from our mistakes. We're trying to do exactly the same thing. We're trying to overthrow a government is really, I think, what we're after here, regime change. And we have some backfire examples of exactly how that works out in exactly this region with these people. What do we expect to have happen?
Well, it's worked so well in Iraq. I mean,
Yeah, well,
that's really doing
right,
well over
exactly.
there. Now, I mean, you're absolutely right. What's the next step? You overthrow
So then
the
what?
regime, and then what?
Right.
And the accusation is, of course, that Iran is meddling
Oh, yeah.
throughout the Middle East, right?
Yes.
Now, Iran has not invaded any other country in the Middle East.
That's right.
I mean, you'd have to go back a really long time to
Right.
find any kind of Persian
That's what I was gonna
invasion,
say.
right? Iran has not invaded other countries. Now, why is Iran accused of meddling? Again, because as the major Sunni power
That's
in the
right.
region, they support other Sunni groups that are in
Yes.
various kinds of conflicts.
Yes.
Whether it's in Lebanon, Hezbollah in Lebanon, which basically came into existence after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon back in 1982. Hezbollah developed at that point as a kind of defensive front, and it's become a very powerful organization. Hamas, of course, is a group in Palestine, and of course, always painted as a terrorist group because Hamas opposes the Israeli occupation, right?
Right.
I mean, we'll get back to this
Yeah,
in a
we'll
little
talk
bit,
about
but that's why Hamas. But again, Hamas is also a Shiite group.
Yep.
So again, the various Shia groups in the Middle East are going to be supported by. Did I say Sunni earlier?
Sunni.
I think I meant Shia.
you meant Shia.
I meant Shia. So and again, this is another problem that for many Americans we don't have
they
an
don't
understanding
distinguish.
of this religious battle that's also going on. So again, to be clear, Iran is Shia, Hezbollah, Hamas are Shia, and of course Saudi Arabia is Sunni, and so this Sunni-Shia conflict is one of the issues. I mean, it's broader than that. It's a geopolitical conflict, but it also has this religious dimension to it as well. So Iran is accused of meddling because it provides support for these other Shia groups. Now, what doesn't get pointed out is that Iran opposed ISIS. Who helped defeat ISIS?
Right.
Trump keeps saying, oh,
That's
I defeated
true.
ISIS. Who really defeated ISIS? It was Iran, for the most part.
Yeah.
Iran fought against, again,
They fought
ISIS.
against, they let us in to have troops there, to have supplies, to use their geographic location to our advantage. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So Iran does not support the Sunni terrorist groups that have most attacked the United States. I mean, who attacked the United States on 9/11? It was Sunni groups, right? Was not the Shia groups that Iran supports. And in fact, Iran has opposed them. We took out, of course, the one government in the Middle East that did serve as sort of a bulwark against Iran, and that was Iraq, right? Saddam Hussein was sort of a strongman bulwark against Iran. We took him out. When we took him out with an illegal invasion, right? Talk about meddling in the Middle East.
Right.
Who meddled in the Middle East here? The United States carried out an illegal, unethical invasion of Iraq. We took out Saddam Hussein. So what did that do? That allowed the Shia groups within Iraq to come to power, which of course strengthened Iran, right? So why has Iran become even stronger in the Middle East? Well, because we allowed it to by taking out Saddam Hussein.
Right. So Iran is supporting the Shia in Iraq now, right?
Yes.
Very much so.
Yes.
And that's very confusing because we don't know what to do about that because they're so in there, but these are the people that are helping the at least some stabilization in the country,
Right.
which makes it crazy.
Yeah.
And of course, they're also supporting the Houthi rebels
Yes.
in Yemen.
Yeah.
And of course, now the Sunni group that controls Yemen is being
Yeah.
supported by Saudi Arabia, and
Yeah.
Saudi Arabia has been carrying out very vicious air attacks
That's right.
against the rebels with the full support of the United States. Who's meddling in the Middle East here?
Yes.
Why aren't the Saudis accused of
Accusing of
meddling
meddling,
and
yes.
supporting terror groups in the Middle East? Because they are, and they've been funding terror groups for a long, long time.
Yes.
They're meddling in Yemen. Why
Exactly.
we're meddling in Syria, we're meddling in Iraq, we're meddling in Yemen. Why isn't that considered meddling? But anything that the Iranians do to support the Shia groups is regarded as meddling,
Right.
and therefore makes them a target.
Yeah, and what is the cost of all this, just financially, to the
Yeah.
United States to do all this when we've got so many problems here, but
Right.
all of the attention is over there? And you talked before about the bottom reason why he probably did it
Yeah.
was
Yeah.
his base,
own base.
his promise that
That's
he
right.
was.
That's right. Exactly. I think that this is, so there's I'll just do it now. So there's a new study. About the first year of the Trump administration, the guiding political theory was about economic anxiety, right? That's why people supported him, and that's where this base
Right,
was really
right.
coming from, and bring the coal jobs back, and all the manufacturing, all that. And it turns out that theory really didn't hold much water. There's a new study published in the National Academy of Sciences. I know we don't believe in science anymore, but it's the most prestigious place you can do. Some researchers at the University of Pennsylvania, and they've gone back through all of that, and really it's about status or cultural displacement. That it's the white male voter realizing that they're going to be a minority, and they're
Oh, yeah.
scared of that. And this is all speaking to race, to the culture wars that we're having, and that now is the dominant theory that explains why Trump's base supports the things that he does, and why a evangelical, Christian right can suddenly ignore all the moral family values that they've traditionally used as reasons to oppose candidates, because it's much more important to keep our cultural hierarchy than anything else. And we feel threatened at that, and these actions are against the other, right? The classic sociological other that we feel are threatening us. And that's what Jerusalem is about, right? That we'll talk about next. That's what explains most of this. The wall, all of those same things are about how do I keep my status, right, is really the way to think about it. And that seems to be fleshing out over the last year and a half of studies as the main determinant of this support and this base and the actions that Trump is motivated by.
Because the demographics are changing,
That's right.
and white people are going to be a minority in
That's
this
right.
country.
That's right.
Wow.
And okay, there's probably some fear associated with that. The change, right? How is that going to happen? But the response is, of course, fascism is really just to go straight into totalitarianism, isolationism, protect ourselves, maintain your status above all others. Yeah.
That's really scary because
is.
I'm just finishing reading Ron Chernow's new book on Grant
Yeah.
and what happened after the Civil War in the South, and the tremendous backlash against bringing black people into the society, and the fear
Right.
and the murders that took place in that.
Right.
That's really scary
Yeah.
when you think about that.
Exactly.
The desperation of people trying to fight this reality that's going to happen here.
Exactly.
Yeah, scary.
And that's tied to us then, supposedly the U.S. losing its global dominance.
Yeah.
Where is the hierarchy? Why aren't we the most important, person in the room anymore? It's all about this status.
Right, and more, we're falling behind other countries in every measure
Exactly
of quality
right.
of life.
Exactly.
And that's
And I would argue, and many argue better than I, all of the things we are doing do not help our status
Not at all. Not
in
at
the
all.
world economically or on any measure that we might choose.
Right.
Well, choosing to withdraw from a major international accord
Oh, gee.
is just one of the worst possible
Exactly.
things that you could do, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Richard Falk, who is a international law expert,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
political
Mhm.
science professor,
Yep.
in talking about the withdrawing from the Iran deal, he said these three things, which I thought were fabulous. He said, it undermined the reliability of multilateral diplomacy.
Exactly.
Okay.
Right.
It compromised peaceful dispute resolution.
Yes.
Because what's the option other
This
than
is what
war?
we're saying, right? What they're
Right.
really calling for is war.
And it eroded the authority of international law.
Agreed.
So, you know, if we really think about it in that larger picture, then what the United States has done here, and of course this is not the only thing, right?
Yes.
Withdrawing from the Paris
That's right.
Climate Agreement, right?
That's right.
And, you know.
And it's not just, you know, it's also the way in which we are going about our foreign relations or any international treaty work, right? We don't say, you know, maybe this isn't such a good thing. Do you want to talk again, Don? We do hard exits announced on Twitter with unbelievably inflammatory language and, you know, the worst words you can get by with on Twitter, right? Are how we do these hard exits that leave zero room because, again, what is it really about for Trump? My brand, how do I look? Are we still on top? Am I the most important person in the room? And thereby, right?
It's bullying,
That's right.
blustering, bluffing.
That's right.
Also, because,
doesn't matter if it's true or not.
But,
you know,
it's just a toxic combination.
That's
this kind of unilateralism, but it's also sort of a neo-isolationism. Right?
It is. That's exactly
right. We're going to withdraw from the rest of the world, but at the same time, we also want to assert our dominance over that world.
That's right.
And again, what a toxic combination that is.
That's
Who
right.
would trust us right now?
Right.
So Trump is supposed to meet with Kim in a week or so.
Yeah.
I mean, already there's some question about whether that summit is going to happen because John Bolton tried to blow it up already.
I know.
He threw a bomb into it, said, well, the Libyan model for denuclearization, which of course resulted in the death of Gaddafi, right? So he's kind of blown this, you know, certainly this alarmed the North Koreans immediately when Bolton gets involved in this and makes those kind of inflammatory statements. But again, even taking Bolton out of that picture, why would North Korea want to enter into some kind of an accord with us at this point, given our demonstrated incapacity to abide by these accords under this administration?
That's exactly right.
Anytime you hear a career diplomat speak about what's going on, they're just abhorred with everything that's going on. It's exactly the opposite of way diplomacy would work. That really strikes me. The second thing that really strikes me is all these are short-term decisions that are making him look strong and powerful right now, but the long-term consequences of all these are really, really scary to everybody.
The long-term consequences weaken the United States.
Absolutely,
That's exactly
weaken the United States.
Doesn't make America great again. Take that hat off, because it's not making America great again. It's making America extremely weak in the long run.
That's right.
And as you pointed out earlier, all of our European allies basically argued against this.
That's right.
Russia and China are both part of that accord. This only strengthens them in the long run. I mean, there's certainly problems for them with our withdrawal, but in the long run, basically what this says to them is, okay, forget the United States.
The US.
They're not a reliable partner. They're not going to participate.
That's
They're only going to blow things up. So we can't deal with them. And so they want to be isolated. Well,
go on.
They're isolated. We're not going to deal with them. We have to come up with the solutions. And so for the moment, the thing that's likely to happen is that Iran's going to stay in the deal, right?
Yes.
Because the Europeans, the Russians, and the Chinese have basically said, we're still in.
That's right.
And we'll work with you, and we will make this work. And so that's the short term on this. But if that becomes impossible to hold together, then again, we're on a road to war, which is a disastrous and costly war.
Right. But they're all strengthening those economic and diplomatic relations while we're blowing things up.
We're left out.
And we're totally left out. The other thing you mentioned, Don, about the career diplomats, right? This is also the largest exodus we've seen of career and agency bureaucrats leaving an administration. And that also then means there aren't these back channels in place, right? So when we do these hard exits and we blow up on Twitter, right, usually there's a lot of other people on the ground or in other relationships that work these things out, that help smooth these things out to even take a next step.
Right.
And we don't even seem to have that anymore, because all these posts remain unfilled. Everyone has left. That, you know, it's really, that even makes it more dangerous to me, right? So when I think about, again, who can stop this? What do we think is likely to happen, and who can stop it? We've really let down in our own agency personnel as well.
Right. And even Tillerson coming out this week and talking about the importance of truth and honesty.
Right.
Really scary, because, like you said, Ron, he's creating these. Trump gets on television and he says these things which these people who are supporting him like to hear, but that has nothing to do with what's really happening on the ground. And all that just is a house of cards, which is going to hurt us bad.
That's right.
And again, back to the notion of American exceptionalism.
Yeah.
You know, and Americans just don't step back and think of this, right? Okay, so we say to Iran, you're seeking a nuclear weapon. You can't have one.
Right.
We have thousands.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We have thousands of nuclear weapons.
That's right.
We say to Iran, we're upset that you have intercontinental ballistic missiles. We have hundreds of intercontinental ballistic missiles and other delivery systems, right? The Ohio-class submarines, for one thing, nuclear-launched submarines.
And we are okay with Israel having nuclear weapons in the Middle East. That's okay.
That's right.
But
that's the other elephant in the room, right?
That's right.
So we say, well, the Middle East has to be denuclearized, right? And in fact, you know, if in fact, and this has come up in the United Nations on numerous occasions, if there would be in fact a conference to say, okay, we are going to create a nuclear weapons-free Middle East,
be great.
It would be great, and the Iranians would be there in an instant, as long as Israel was also a part of that process, because everybody knows Israel has nuclear weapons, right? There's just no doubt about it. They have nuclear weapons illegally. Under international law, they have acquired nuclear weapons. They don't admit to it, and they fiercely punish anybody who reveals any information about their program. But Israel has nuclear weapons. So again, we say, Iran, you can't have one nuclear weapon. We have thousands. Israel has hundreds. You can't have intercontinental ballistic missiles. You can't meddle in the Middle East. We meddle constantly in the Middle East. We engage in illegal invasions of other countries, which Iran doesn't do.
It's very true,
So, again, who are we? I mean, but to most Americans, that's just so foreign. They just
way
like,
to think
what?
about
What?
it.
Of course,
we're the best, and these other folks, and we need to stay the best. And really, what's even more dangerous, if you think about, well, what gives me the power to bully you, right? And to do these kinds of things, right? Historically, military power, which we do apparently still have, and economic power. I think what would be so interesting to watch in this series of events, will the EU, China, Russia, if they really start forming a new economic base, we may lose our economic power. So what if the U.S. does sanctions, which has been our main leverage to get other countries to do what we want, right? We're undermining that very source of our power.
Absolutely.
Right? So, I mean, then we just become North Korea. We have nuclear weapons and nothing else. Deal with us. Right? What a terrible bargaining place for this country to have devolved to.
And a dangerous, extremely dangerous situation to evolve. So I don't think most Americans understand how extremely dangerous this time is. This administration, this president is the most dangerous presidency we have ever had in our country. It is pushing us to the brink of war in numerous places. In numerous places, North Korea, in Iran, in the Middle East, and now, of course, this dangerous, reckless president, ignorant president, irrational president, has made a colossal blunder in the Israeli-Palestinian situation, right?
Absolutely.
By announcing that the United States Embassy will move from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, he has completely blown up any possibility of the peace process in the Middle East, hasn't he?
Absolutely.
Don, this
because
is an area you've been to and that you know a lot about.
You know, Phyllis Bennis had a really good article in these times in which she said, this is the way that the Palestinian people have to show the world that they're still alive and that they're being oppressed. They're willing to put themselves on the line, but almost suicidal, really suicidal to so many people, because the world has just abandoned them. Who's sticking up for them? No one's sticking up for them. But instead, the United States, on the eve of what the Palestinians call Nakba, which was the day that they were driven out of their country and out of their homes, we have this surreal ceremony where the president's daughter and his son-in-law and the vice president and other people,
extreme right-wing evangelical Christians,
who have condemned the Jews because they're not going to be saved because they don't believe in Jesus. These are the people that are speaking at this crazy event. Meanwhile,
40 miles away,
people are being killed.
Slaughtered, massacred.
Split screen. This is going on, and this is going on.
Unarmed people being shot and killed by the Israeli defense
children.
forces.
That's right.
Children being killed. And not one Israeli soldier was killed. The idea that this was in self-defense is so terrible.
Is ludicrous.
But one other thing I think is really important, just like you did with the whole Iran situation, it's really important to see the context of all this and to look at what's happened in Gaza. I mean, Gaza is really an open-air prison where people cannot leave and they can't bring things in, and there's a tremendous shortage of food. The water system has deteriorated terribly. The unemployment among young people is over 50%. People have no chance.
Has been decimated. The medical system has.
Medical system is completely decimated, right? And the UN has said that by 2020, if things don't change, Gaza will be uninhabitable. And in that situation, what else can they do except try to make some kind of a stand and say, we are human, we're going to stand up for our human rights no matter what the cost is. And the cost has been terrible.
And as soon as they do that, they're labeled as terrorists.
That's exactly right.
Exactly.
This is where Hamas is labeled as a terrorist group. And again,
that's right.
No one wants to see Hamas carry out deadly attacks inside of Israel or kill Israeli citizens. But again, if you cage people, they have to, at some point, react and respond. And then when they do, if they become violent in response, then they're the ones who are violent. Their violence causes the situation.
And there was such a small number of people that did anything violent. I mean, they threw stones, but high-powered guns, and the weapons that they used were horrendous. They specifically shot at people's legs, and they used these kind of weapons. When the bullet goes in, it expands, and it just terrible kinds of things. They totally dehumanize the Palestinian people as if they don't count at all.
And again, it's important to point out that what Israel is doing with Gaza and with its occupation of the West Bank is illegal under international law.
Absolutely illegal.
It is a result of the 1967 war. And when Israel grabbed that territory, you're not allowed under international law to then take that territory as a result of the war. Israel has been in violation of international law ever since 1967. And
people have a right of return. The UN has confirmed that the Palestinians have a right of return.
But again, to talk about this, to refer to these as the occupied territory.
Yes.
That's the correct language. That's the correct legal and political language to use to talk about the West Bank and Gaza. These are occupied illegally occupied territories. And of course, there's strong evidence in political science that one of the leading causes of terrorism is foreign occupation.
Foreign occupation.
Exactly.
So we shouldn't be surprised
we shouldn't be
that
too
there's going
surprised.
to pushback, that there's some form of terroristic response to occupation. That's well established in the empirical literature and political science.
And I think one of the things is the U.S. is totally immersed in this whole thing.
Oh yeah.
Israel is the largest recipient of our foreign aid.
Yes.
Almost all of it goes to the military. And it's listed as $3.8 billion, but it's really more than that. It's closer to $5 billion a year that we give them. We give them our best weapons. We totally support them internationally. We are their saviors. We're the ones that are supporting them totally. I have to tell you a story. When I was over there, I went over when the Israelis army had surrounded a town called Beit Sahor, because those people, Palestinians, had refused to pay their taxes because the Israeli government wasn't picking up their trash, weren't doing anything for them. So they invited American activists to come over and try to break the siege, and we did. We were there for about 6 days. And we used those 6 days to observe what was going on. And at the end of that, we were able to get a meeting with the U.S. consul in East Jerusalem, which is the Palestinian area. His name was Wilcox. I'll never forget him. So we went in with our list to say, okay, do you know what's going on here? This human rights violation, this. And we thought he was going to push back and say, no, you don't understand it. And he just kept saying, yeah. Finally, I said, wait a minute. If all this is accurate, why are we giving these people $5 billion a year? Right. He says, because there's no constituency in the United States that's trying to stop it.
That's right.
Who's trying to stop it? Congress isn't trying to stop it. There's not a group out here that's doing it. And I kept thinking about that as I saw those people killed this week. That we need to get that constituency active again and pushing, because what's happening here is totally against any concept of human rights. It's just terrible.
So again, why would we want to do this?
Right.
Right? Because it furthers all the extremist beliefs and status that we want to hold in the Middle East, and the Jewish population is Judeo-Christian.
Right.
I'm sorry, that is, again, it's the same explanation. And just a couple points, Don, too, how do we look at this as the Trump presidency as a dictatorship, as an oligarchy? Who's there representing? There's no actual moderate rabbi who went and supported this thing. They couldn't find anybody to go with them, right? So you have family members representing the Jewish faith, right? Ivanka and Jared are Jewish, and so they are now unelected sponsors of our new policy that no one else also agrees with, right? If you think about our multilateral. So why would we do this? To shake it up, to get the extremists to come out and have a place for their voice to be heard. And what does that lead to? War, right? What you said earlier is, I think, the geopolitical situation, Ron. The U.S., Israel, Saudi against the rest of the Middle East.
And once again, it's the base.
That's right.
The evangelical base, which totally supports Trump.
Exactly
and they formed this alliance, and it was fostered. It's being fostered by us and by Netanyahu.
Absolutely.
And that's his base.
This is why the Iran deal, these things are linked, right? Netanyahu is no small critic of the Iran deal. We're doing all this to form a new alliance so that we can have a war. There's a conservative, well, I'm not even sure what I would call them. They put out a series of videos. They call themselves the Watchmen, not to be confused with the superhero movie. Okay, they basically, the arguments there. Trump is a prophet to them. Is really how he's King Cyrus. He's back to the Persian days, bringing the Book of Ezra and their explanation, of course. I about dropped my own, mouth, even though that the argument is, well, these folks are terrorists. That was exactly the rhetoric that was being put out there from this Watchmen show. Well, 62 people died, but 50 of them were confirmed terrorists.
Oh, right, especially the children, the little kids, right.
Yeah, and eating it up. I mean, the audience eating it up. So we do this show to combat.
Right.
Okay? That is not true.
Alternative views, right?
Alternative views and critical issues. It could not be more pressing, because the other story, not fact, story that is out there that is winning hearts and minds, right?
Right. Now, the Palestinians, I believe today, asked the United Nations World Court to investigate
International
Criminal Court
Yeah.
to investigate what happened there. And of course, the United States opposes that, and Israel's not a member of.
Neither is the United States.
Neither is the United States. So I hope they do.
Yeah.
I hope they do investigate it and put out there exactly what happened.
And it clearly was a violation of, an extreme violation of international law for the Israelis to slaughter the people in Gaza that way. And again, I think it's important to point out, we're criticizing the Israeli state.
Absolutely.
We're criticizing the government of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a right-wing extremist.
That's right.
Yeah.
There are many forces inside of Israel that oppose this policy.
Oh, yes.
Absolutely.
There are many in the Jewish population in the United States that oppose this policy. This is not a question of being anti-Semitic. You and I have been accused of being anti-Semitic because we dare to speak out against this issue. We are criticizing the state of Israel for violations of international law. It has nothing to do with the Jewish religion. It is a state that is violating the law. Just as we are critical of the United States when it violates international law, we can be critical of this state when it violates the international law.
I'm with Jewish Voices for Peace.
Exactly.
Look on their website. These are Jewish people who are saying this is wrong, this is against everything we believe in, this is against who we are as a people, and taking strong stands. Right. It's not anti-Semitic. It's about human rights. And whoever violates human rights, we have a responsibility to speak out against that.
Exactly. And so again, the other question is, okay, who can stop? Who's going to do something about this, right? And Congress, again, has a lot of things that they can do, but they won't. The aid and the money that you speak of is absolutely something that Congress could rein back in, right? Or now we're back to relying on the international community, the rest of the international community to form their alliances and do things without us.
We could support the United Nations and let them be an honest broker in this whole thing. But you just, again, how much does Trump understand about all this? How much does he know about this? How much does he consult people that are experts in this area? That's completely off the table.
Well, power is never just given away.
That's right. That's right. It's going to be a painful thing. I mean, okay, so we had the Intifada, which was totally nonviolent, then the second Intifada, which had some violence in it, and now we got this. But the world has to pay attention to what is happening to these people here.
And we're the ones that need to be controlled, right? It's the U.S. that needs to be controlled in all of these situations to not escalate to all-out war in Iran and the Jerusalem move. Both of those say, let's go to war.
And there's a double tragedy here because at one point the United States did in fact try to be an honest broker.
They did.
And to try to negotiate, I mean, think of Jimmy Carter.
That's just what I was saying.
And what Carter was able to accomplish with Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat. And so the U.S. was even perceived by both sides as an honest broker attempting to, despite we always tilted toward Israel, no doubt about that, but at least we were always viewed as an honest broker. And the international political community also would have an important role to play. But now we are no longer an honest broker. And by moving the embassy to Jerusalem, no other American president ever even considered this, Republican or Democrat, because they knew that it would totally destroy the peace process, that it's prejudging one of the most important things, that it has to be negotiated between the Palestinians and the Israelis if there's to be a two-state solution, which seems almost impossible to achieve at this point. And now completely impossible because of moving. So we were, no other president would ever do this.
Go ahead.
So no, it isolates us completely from the whole international community too, right?
That's
none of them.
We're doing the same thing in all of these situations. Paris, the climate, the Iran, this is all that. So one of the more shocking things of one of Trump's statements about Jerusalem to me was about sort of what you were talking about. He said, well, I want to achieve Middle East peace. Oh, okay, I'm still with you.
We're good with it.
And the only way to do that is to pick a side. Was how
pick a side?
And that really has stuck with me. No, picking a side means fight, means picking a fight, right? And that's not, so that just has really stuck. That's what he's doing, or wants to do.
But if there's not a two-state solution, which I think is becoming more and more impossible, then what happens? Do we have South African apartheid?
Right.
Because, again, the
Those people are stuck
demographics.
there. Yep.
Jewish people are going to be a minority there.
That's right.
And they don't want that to
don't want
happen either. So if they don't do this and try to work for some kind of a reasonable solution, then what happens?
Exactly. You pick a
Disaster.
side and you go to war.
Right.
I know.
Well, yes.
How are we going to turn this around, guys? Come on. That's why I keep trying to think, well, who can stop this? What other chances? Who should we be supporting? What actions should we be calling for? You know, what should we be calling Congress about? I mean, those are the kinds of things that I think you're absolutely right, Don. Where is the pro-Palestinian movement in this country to,
Well, Ron was talking before about people not understanding what's going on. I don't think people have the slightest idea about what the history is in the Middle East and what has happened in the Middle East. So I think maybe one place to start is trying to raise consciousness. I think what was the interfaith group bringing Cohen in here to speak did a really good job. And I think we have to keep doing those things and keep raising consciousness because I think the vast majority of American people want to do the right thing and do care about human rights.
Right. And we're lucky in Kalamazoo, we have KNOW, which held a vigil, and has the Meet Your Muslim Neighbor program in Kalamazoo going on through a lot of the interfaith. Those are the kinds of things I think we can support and maybe be a model for. But in this political climate, that makes us a target as well,
course,
right?
Of course.
Yeah, I really think that nothing good can happen until members of the Republican Party stand up.
I agree.
I mean, Trump is a rogue force within his own party.
Yeah.
And I mean, the blue wave may be coming in terms of the midterm elections this year. More Democrats might be elected. Democrats might retake the House and even the Senate. But I think until there are Republicans who stand up to Trump and say, this doesn't represent our party or our traditional values, then I don't think anything's going to change. And until we get to that point where there are strong established Republicans who are willing to speak out and stand up rather than to simply support this guy without question, then I really fear for the long-term consequences of what's going to happen.
I think that's a very good, accurate analysis of where we are.
We just have 1 minute left, so final thoughts.
I just keep thinking of what was the title of Ralph Nader's book, Congress, Do Your Job? Something like that, how things come around, right?
I just think that it's really important to know that there are people all over the world who are standing with the Palestinians.
Yes.
And we're not isolated in our stand with them, and that's what's really important.
Well said, well said. Well, thanks again. Great session. Critical issues, certainly alternative views. Thank you for joining us. We invite you to come back and see us again on the program Critical Issues, Alternative Views.